I ran across a story recently about a farmer in a Midwestern state. This fella had a strong disdain for all things religious. And as he plowed his field with intention on Sunday mornings, he would go by the road and shake his fist at the church people who passed by him on their way to worship. October came around, and the farmer had his finest harvest ever, the best crop in the entire county. When the harvest was complete, he placed an ad in the local paper. So this is like an old story. And that ad belittled the Christians for their faith in God. At the end of his diatribe, he wrote, "Faith in God must not mean much if someone like me can prosper." The Christians were quiet and polite in response. The next time the paper came out, though, there was an ad, and it read, "God doesn't always settle accounts in October. Teach me your way, O Lord, and I will walk in your truth." That's the opening line that our psalmist gives us from today's psalm. It is perhaps the wisest desire we can hold for ourselves, that we will be a people who can discern a relationship with God and have thoughts and actions that keep us in right relationship with God and one another. But like all things we desire, it's more often than not just a little bit out of reach for us. Because we like to live with our own will at the center. Our own whims and our decision-making, generally speaking, center on what we want and what we need. Now, none of y'all can identify with this, but there may be one or two of you in this church today who wake up in the mornings, you get your morning routine and you get your bearings, and then you might begin to think about your day and how you want it to unfold. You might run through your to-do list. You might think about what you might want for dinner, what you need to pull from the freezer or stop at the store to get. And you're thinking about that errand. That errand you got to run. You got to call those people that you said you'd call or text. You're not a caller. About the things that are upcoming in your life. Plans, events, projects. And I'm guessing that laying across all of that internal dialogue is not walking in the truth of God. If it's there, it's back there, running in the background. But I still think we seek to be kind, generally. Most people do. And at the very least, if we can't be kind, we may try not to harm anybody, or at least be neutral. And honestly, there are seasons in our lives, or days in particular, where we're just trying to survive it, to get through it and have it be over. But as we're running through that plan that we're making for ourselves, sometime during the day, we will inevitably run into something that we perceive as injustice. It might be in the form of a current event that we read about. We might have heard about a decision made by one of our civic leaders that we think is going to cause harm to people, particularly people in need. We might have the occasion to sit with a friend or a relative who's going through a crisis that's created from violence or dishonesty or disloyalty or betrayal, loss. The human lived experience is fraught with crisis and trauma and injustice. And sadly, each of us will experience it at some point in our lives. And when we are confronted with life's calamities and tragedies, it just can seem so unfair, so unjust, and simply overwhelming. We seek good as humans in general, and when what around us is not good, or what is within us we know not to be good as well, that disrupts our plans and our expectations. Life isn't fair, my dad used to say, when I would say that something was unfair. And while that is true, it's not generally a comforting thing to say to anyone, just FYI. It's like telling people to calm down. Doesn't work either. What about the rest of the world, though? Where is the fairness? Where's the accountability? Where's the justice? The enemy sowing weeds in the field of freshly planted wheat is an image from today's parable that fits right into that picture of how we think the world should be versus how it actually ends up being. We go about our business making our plans, and then stuff happens. We try to live our lives being good people who are accountable for our actions, and then we see somebody get away with something pretty awful, or treat somebody very poorly, or who discriminates against others based on their own biases. We read about horrific crimes and violence, hopefully not too much, both here and in faraway places. And I'm telling you, when children are impacted, that really gets me. And if you've paid any attention in the last week or so, the devastating results of climate change are deeply, deeply impacting the lives of people all over the world. Perhaps the psalmist's words are more like a plea than a suggestion. Teach me your way, O Lord, and I will walk in your truth. But what is the truth from this parable? What is Jesus teaching to his followers? We want to see ourselves as the good guys, right? We're the wheat in the story. We've been planted in neat and straight rows. We are destined to get just the right amount of sunlight and moisture so we can grow straight and tall and give our good grain upon the harvest. That's what we desire for ourselves. But there is evil and there is injustice, both in us and around us, that blocks the sun, dries up the rain, and bends our stalks. Those parts of ourselves and our surroundings are in our way. We want them gone. And there are people who prosper that we might think are evil. And the injustice of it all can make trying to walk in the way of God and God's truth seem like a frustrating task, because this isn't turning out how I planned. Human nature is the very first topic addressed in the Book of Common Prayer's outline of the faith, commonly called the Catechism. There's a Book of Common Prayer in front of you. You haven't maybe touched it in a little while, because we put everything in our bulletin now. But on page 845, beginning on page 845 of the Book of Common Prayer, there is a section that outlines the doctrine of our faith. Now, I want you to pause and remember it was published in 1979. So there's a couple things that need to be updated that we've changed in the church since then. But if you haven't had a chance to ever read those questions and answers about the doctrine of our faith, I invite you to do so. And if you haven't read about them in some time, I'd invite you to take a look. If you're bored right now, you can do that, I guess. That's okay, you'll get the same message. It's perfect. See how I did that? The authors of our prayer book, start with the question of what is human nature, because it is often the biggest source of our frustration and downfall. Why do humans do what humans do, both to ourselves and to one another? I'll pull out a few highlights from this section that describe that we are made as humans in the image of God, and we are free to make choices, to love, to create, to reason, and to live in harmony with creation and with God and one another. It goes on to point out the observation, like we didn't already know this, that we don't use that freedom well. And we put ourselves in the place of God as an act of rebellion. We walk in our own ways rather than in the ways of God. We've got our truth, and we're going to stand by it. We see ourselves as wheat rather than weeds, and we want someone, preferably God, but it could be anyone really, to get the weeds out of our way. But God's justice doesn't happen in October or on our time at all. It doesn't happen when we demand it of God. It frankly doesn't happen when we demand it of each other very well either. But God's justice is full of grace and mercy. And that is such a glorious response that can give us our greatest hope, but can also be a deep, deep burning frustration when we face and see wrongdoing. So I wonder, what might change within us to match that God-bearing image? If the first words we thought or spoke every morning when we woke up were these: "Teach me your way, O Lord, and I will walk in your truth." Teach me your way, O Lord, and I will walk in your truth. How might we see our own goodness along with our faults, our own internal battles with God's ways, and our own self-determination to do what we want for ourselves rather than what God might will for us and for creation? How might it change us to remember our God image and let that guide our free will? And how might that help us to see the world the way that God desires it to be and the way that God sees it? Because God sees it as good, created to be good. And joining with God, we can accept the invitation to join in that restoration to good. Let anyone with ears listen.